What if I told you that the devil you've been taught to fear your entire life never really existed? Not in the way they told you. Not as some horned demon lurking in the shadows waiting to drag your soul into eternal fire. No, what you've been told about evil, sin, and the devil himself was never designed to liberate you. It was crafted to control you. And the worst part? That lie was planted before you even had the words to question it. From the moment you were old enough to listen, you were handed a version of reality soaked in fear. As a child, you were taught to fear something invisible, something that knew your thoughts, watched your every move, and was ready to punish you for simply being human. You were told there was a cosmic enemy, a deceiver who wanted your soul, and that if you didn't follow the rules, if you didn't obey the structures, if you didn't confess your sins and bow down, you would be handed over to this monstrous being for eternal torment. Think about that. Before you could even think critically, before you had the capacity to question why, you were told to be afraid. This fear didn't just shape your spiritual beliefs, it sculpted your entire identity. It taught you to doubt your desires, to question your inner voice, to suppress your natural curiosity. It whispered that you were born flawed, broken, inherently sinful, that something dark already lived inside you and that only external forces, clergy, rituals, rules could save you. That's not spirituality, that's programming. And the more you examine it, the clearer it becomes that the devil as we know it isn't a being at all. It's an invention, a weapon disguised as a warning. To truly understand how deep this goes, you have to look at the origins. The character we now call the devil doesn't even appear in the early texts of many spiritual traditions in the way we've been led to believe. The idea of a red-skinned figure with horns, a pitchfork, and a tail, that imagery didn't come from divine revelation, it was built through centuries of mythological borrowing, political manipulation, and psychological conditioning. Much of it was influenced by pagan deities, beings who were once honored as protectors of nature, fertility, and balance. As power structures shifted and dominant religions rose, those ancient gods were systematically demonized. Horns, once symbols of sacred wisdom and nature's power, were rebranded as signs of evil. The goat, once a sacred animal associated with vitality and abundance, became a symbol of darkness. Why? Because control requires a villain, a scapegoat. If you want to enslave a population, you don't chain their bodies, you capture their minds. And the most effective way to do that is to create something terrifying, something so immense, so horrifying, that they'll never dare step out of line. That's what the devil became. A boundary marker, a warning label on forbidden knowledge, a fence around spiritual sovereignty. It wasn't about saving souls, it was about keeping power centralized. Organized religion understood early on that if people realized the divine spark lived within them, if they discovered they were already connected to Source without a priest, a middleman, or a doctrine, the entire system would collapse. So a story was written, one of punishment, fear, sin, and external salvation. And at the center of that story stood a terrifying figure designed to keep you compliant, the devil. The demonization of desire, intuition, and questioning didn't happen by accident. It was engineered. The devil became the mask for anything that threatened religious authority. Passion was called temptation, independence was labeled rebellion, mysticism was branded heresy. Even other belief systems, Buddhism, Taoism, ancient African cosmologies, indigenous shamanic traditions, were not spared. Anything that didn't align with the dominant narrative was painted with the same brush: dangerous, evil, devilish. But underneath that label was always something powerful, something liberating, something that put your soul, not a structure, in charge of your journey. The real devil has always been a mirror, not of evil, but of empowerment, and that terrified those in power. Because once you realize you're not inherently sinful, once you remember that you are a divine being having a human experience, you begin to unlearn their entire system. You stop outsourcing your worth, you stop begging for forgiveness, you stop fearing your own mind. That's why they taught you the devil was always watching, because if you believed you were always being judged, you'd never trust your own inner compass, and if you couldn't trust yourself, you'd always be dependent on them. But what if everything you were told about the devil was backwards? What if the darkness you were warned about was actually a misunderstood form of initiation, a call to integrate your shadow, to face your fear, to grow. What if what they called evil was actually your invitation to reclaim personal power? Think about it. The parts of yourself you were told to suppress, your anger, your hunger for truth, your curiosity, your spiritual intuition, were they truly evil? Or were they simply inconvenient for a system built on obedience? Fear is the most potent form of control. If they can make you afraid of yourself, afraid of your thoughts, your desires, your impulses, they don't need chains. You'll police yourself. And that's exactly what happened. You began to monitor your own inner world through the lens of shame and guilt. You internalized a voice that said, "I am bad," not because you were, but because they needed you to believe it. And the devil? He became the justification for every denial of your power. But here's the truth they don't want you to know. The devil is not an external force lurking in the shadows. The real battle has always been internal. It's between your conditioned self, the one trained to obey, fear, and conform, and your authentic self, which is wild, sovereign, and divine. The only devil that exists is the version of you still trapped in that old programming. And once you start to wake up, you don't need to fight that part of you. You need to understand it. You need to unlearn the lie. There was never a red monster hiding under your bed. There was only the shadow of your own brilliance, waiting to be acknowledged. And as long as that shadow goes unseen, it will wear masks that terrify you. But when you finally turn and face it, you realize there's nothing there but power you've forgotten how to hold. You were not born broken. You were not born stained by original sin. You were born whole, radiant, and sacred. The real deception wasn't that the devil was out there. It was that the divine wasn't in here. That's the lie. And it's the first one you were told. Now the question island. Will you keep believing it? Or will you remember who you were before they taught you to fear yourself? Because the moment you do, the devil disappears. What if I told you that the only thing keeping you from your power is fear? Not the kind of fear that protects you from real danger, but the kind that seeps into your spirit without permission. The kind that whispers from pulpits and books and rituals that you are not enough, not worthy, not safe without someone else saving you. This isn't just emotional manipulation, it's vibrational warfare. And the most insidious part? You've been living inside it your entire life, thinking it was truth. From your earliest days, fear was planted like a seed. You were told to be afraid of the devil, of sin, of eternal punishment. You were taught that even your thoughts could betray you, that some invisible, malevolent force was waiting, always waiting to catch you slipping. Step out of line, ask the wrong question, trust the wrong feeling, and you'd fall, not just socially, but cosmically, forever. And so fear wrapped around your nervous system, binding you into submission without a single chain. That's how they did it. Not with facts, not with love, but with the slow, suffocating drip of fear disguised as truth. But here's the real secret. Fear doesn't just control your behavior, it lowers your frequency. Every time you internalize guilt, every time you shrink yourself to avoid punishment, every time you obey not out of understanding, but out of fear, you separate from the very thing you're trying to find. Your higher self doesn't live in fear. It lives in expansion, in trust, in love. But fear collapses that space. It pulls you into survival mode, disconnecting you from the infinite intelligence that flows through your soul. That's not an accident. It's by design. Because a person connected to their higher self, a person grounded in their own knowing, is impossible to control. They don't ask permission to be who they are. They don't submit to authority that vibrates lower than their truth. They don't need intermediaries to reach the divine. And that kind of person is dangerous to any system built on hierarchy. So fear becomes the leash. Not just fear of punishment, but fear of the unknown, fear of freedom, fear of yourself. That's the part they don't tell you. That you've been trained to fear your own awakening. You've been taught to mistrust the feelings that lead you inward. The voice inside you, the one that questions, the one that feels, the one that knows it, was labeled suspicious, dangerous, demonic. Why? Because that voice threatens the structure. That voice tells you to ask why, to dig deeper, to stop settling for empty rituals and shallow answers. And once you do that, Once you listen to your inner voice, instead of external authority, the whole illusion starts to crack. But you were never meant to listen to yourself. You were meant to listen to them. To obey the doctrine, to trust the fear, to keep your vibration low enough to remain dependent. That's how spiritual hierarchy sustains itself. Not with love, but with scarcity. It tells you that you're separate from God, that you're broken and need to be fixed, that without someone intervening on your behalf, you're doomed. And who does the intervening? Them. Always them. The priest, the pastor, the institution. They stand between you and the divine, not to guide you, but to gatekeep access to what was already yours. And so you live in a loop, afraid of the devil, afraid of questioning, afraid of your own divinity. You beg for forgiveness for things that weren't even sins. You silence parts of yourself that are actually sacred. You trade your sovereignty for security, not realizing that what you're being protected from is your own awakening. That's the power of fear. It doesn't just keep you small, it convinces you that small is holy. It turns contraction into obedience. It teaches you that to play it safe is to be righteous. But who defines safety? Who decides what's righteous? Systems that have everything to gain from your silence. Imagine how different your life would be if you had never been taught to fear the devil. If instead, you had been shown that the divine was within you, that your inner voice was a compass, not a curse. Imagine if your emotions weren't things to be managed, but messengers from your soul. Imagine if curiosity wasn't punished, but celebrated as a path to truth. That's the life fear took from you. That's the connection fear severed. Not because you were wrong, but because your power was inconvenient. And that's exactly why they need fear to survive. Because without it, you would see clearly. You would see that your soul was never lost. That your essence was never dirty. That there is no monster chasing you, only an old story built to make sure you never step out of line. You'd stop asking for permission to be free. You'd remember that you were never meant to follow. You were meant to rise. But they couldn't have that. So they wrapped your awakening in warnings. They painted your intuition as rebellion. They made self-trust feel like heresy. Because if you ever stopped being afraid, you'd stop needing them. And that's the moment everything changes. When you realize that fear isn't a spiritual virtue, it's a spiritual weapon. One that was used to enslave your energy, to keep you doubting your own light, to keep you stuck in a cage with the door wide open. And the truth is, the moment you stop fearing the devil, the spell breaks. You begin to feel your own power again. You start to see the games for what they are. And maybe for the first time, you start living from a place of love, not fear, of sovereignty, not submission, of presence, not programming. The devil didn't disconnect you from God, fear did. And as long as you keep holding on to that fear, you will never fully reconnect. Because the frequency of fear and the frequency of the divine cannot coexist. They are opposites. One contracts, the other expands. One isolates, the other unites. One binds you to a false system, the other frees you into your true nature. So the question isn't whether you believe in the devil. The question, island, do you believe in yourself? Do you believe in the voice that rises inside you when everything outside tries to silence it? Do you believe that you deserve to live without fear? That you are already enough, already divine without someone telling you how to earn it? Because the moment you do, fear loses its grip. The hierarchy begins to crumble. And what's left is not chaos, but clarity. Not rebellion, but remembrance. The divine never needed fear to reach you, only they did. And now you know why. The weapon was never a pitchfork, it was programming. Fear was the system. But you're the glitch. You are the one who sees the lie, the one who feels the pull to go deeper. And once you step out of the vibration of fear, you begin to rise, not into rebellion, but into truth, because the real heresy was never questioning. The real heresy was forgetting who you are. What if I told you that the very symbols you've been taught to fear were never meant to harm you? They were meant to awaken you. That the serpent, the horned god, the fallen angel, these were never monsters, they were mirrors. What if the devil you've run from your whole life was actually a veil placed there to hide your power from you? For thousands of years, ancient symbols carried deep, sacred meaning. They weren't evil, they were encoded messages from older civilizations, maps for the soul, keys to transformation. But somewhere along the way, those maps were burned, rewritten, and rebranded as warnings. And the keys? They were buried beneath centuries of fear, distortion, and spiritual censorship. The serpent was one of the first symbols to be twisted. In countless ancient traditions, the serpent represents life force, rebirth, divine wisdom. In Egyptian mythology, it encircles the world as a symbol of eternity. In Hinduism, it coils at the base of your spine as Kundalini, dormant spiritual energy waiting to rise. The serpent is not evil, it is sacred. It is the embodiment of transformation, the shedding of what no longer serves you, the awakening of hidden power. But in the mainstream religious narrative, the serpent became the villain, a deceiver. The one who led humanity astray. That wasn't an accident, it was a rebranding campaign, a strategic inversion of a symbol that once stood for the very power they didn't want you to access. And then there's the horned god. In pre-Christian cultures, horned deities represented fertility, nature, the wild, untamable forces of life. They stood for balance between masculine and feminine, between death and rebirth, between chaos and creation. Cernunnos, Pan, Dionysus, all horned, all revered. These were not demonic beings. They were embodiments of vitality, connection to the earth, freedom from spiritual repression. But when religious empires rose, they couldn't allow people to stay connected to their own primal wisdom. The sacred wild had to be suppressed, domesticated. So the horned god was painted as the devil. What once symbolized harmony with nature was transformed into an icon of horror, not because it was evil, but because it was free. This pattern isn't random, it's systematic. Sacred symbols have been inverted again and again to keep you afraid of your own evolution. Why would someone do that? Because a person who understands these symbols, who knows how to work with them, is no longer controllable. You can't shame someone who understands the serpent. You can't dominate someone who walks with the horned god. You can't manipulate someone who knows that Lucifer, the so-called fallen one, is not a monster but a metaphor. Lucifer means light-bringer, morning star. In Latin, the name had no sinister implication. It was associated with the planet Venus, radiant, beautiful, and ever-returning. In Gnostic teachings and mystical philosophies, Lucifer represented the quest for knowledge, the spark of divine consciousness within matter. Not evil, not fallen, but rebellious in the highest sense. The one who dares to question, to seek truth beyond imposed boundaries, to bring light into darkness. And yet, the church could not afford to honor that. They needed obedience, not illumination. So the light-bringer became the prince of darkness. The questioner became the traitor. The symbol of awakening was rewritten as a warning. But ask yourself this: if Lucifer truly was the enemy of your soul, why did his name originally mean bringer of light? Why was he associated with stars, with illumination, with awakening? Why does every suppressed spiritual system, from Gnosticism to Hermeticism, carry some variation of this archetype as a necessary part of the journey? It's because the so-called fall is not a descent into evil, it's a descent into matter, into experience, into the realm of contrast, where you get to remember your divinity by living through your humanity. That's not rebellion, that's initiation. In alchemical traditions, this descent is part of the process. Solve et coagula, dissolve and reform. The fall is not a failure, it's a stage in transformation. You descend so you can rise. You forget so you can remember. The darkness is not a punishment, it's the womb of rebirth. And those ancient symbols, the serpent, the horned god, the light-bringer, are all archetypes guiding you through that cycle. They are not threats, they are thresholds. But to keep power, those in control had to sever your relationship with them. They had to convince you that the very symbols that could free you were actually chains, that the very archetypes that could guide you were monsters, that the fire that awakens you would burn you forever. And so the myth of the devil was constructed piece by piece out of inverted wisdom and silenced truth. What's wild is that even as these symbols were demonized on the surface, they were preserved in secret by those who understood their true meaning. The serpent appears on the caduceus, the symbol of healing. The pentagram, often misunderstood, is a symbol of the human form, head, arms, and legs extended, and of the 5 elements: earth, air, fire, water, and spirit. The light-bringer, the one cast down, still shines in esoteric teachings as the force that challenges stagnation and blind obedience. The truth never vanished. It was just hidden in plain sight. Because here's what they fear more than the devil: they fear you realizing that you never needed saving, that you are not separate from the divine, that the symbols meant to scare you are actually portals to your own awakening, that the devil wasn't your enemy, he was a decoy, a diversion, and the moment you stop running, the illusion falls apart. You begin to see that these ancient symbols were never meant to enslave you, they were meant to liberate you, but only if you're willing to reclaim them. Reclamation doesn't mean rebellion for the sake of rebellion. It means remembering. It means seeing through the illusion and recognizing that what you fear is often the doorway to what you need most. The serpent wants you to awaken. The horned god wants you to return to the earth. The lightbringer wants you to question the story. And all of them live within you as archetypal energies, aspects of your own soul calling you to rise. You don't have to keep fearing what you don't understand. You can start listening. You can start remembering. You can start tracing the path back through the myths, through the dogma, through the centuries of distortion. And when you do, you'll find that the symbols you feared were only terrifying because someone told you they were. Once you see them clearly, they're not frightening. They're empowering. The serpent sheds its skin, so can you. The horned god embraces the wild, so can you. The lightbringer challenges the system, so can you. Not because you're rebelling against truth, but because you're reclaiming it, because you were never meant to worship in fear, you were meant to walk in wisdom. And wisdom isn't about avoiding darkness, it's about learning to see in it. You were taught to run from these symbols, but the deeper truth, they were always running toward you. What if I told you that the one you've been taught to fear the most is actually a symbol of your own awakening? That Lucifer, the very name used to strike fear into hearts for centuries, was never meant to represent evil, but instead, the light within you waiting to be remembered? The name Lucifer comes from Latin roots, lux meaning light, and fer meaning to carry. Lucifer literally means light bearer. This alone should make you pause. Why would the bearer of light be the villain? Why would illumination be punished, unless there was something or someone that benefited from keeping you in the dark? The truth is not found in the caricature created by religious institutions. It's not found in the red-skinned demon with horns and a pitchfork, or in the fiery torment used to scare children into obedience. It's found in the symbolism that existed long before those stories were weaponized. Lucifer is not a being to be worshipped or feared. It's an archetype that lives inside you. A symbol of the rebel soul, the spark of divine fire that refuses to be extinguished. It is the voice that whispers when everyone else is silent, the question that rises when others accept, the light that dares to shine in forbidden places. Esoteric teachings from ancient traditions understood this. They didn't see Lucifer as the destroyer. They saw it as the challenger, the bringer of contrast. In those teachings, the fall from heaven wasn't a punishment. It was a descent into matter, a journey into density, into the physical, into the realm where consciousness forgets itself in order to remember again. In this framework, Lucifer represents the divine spark that enters the illusion of separation, that experiences limitation, suffering, and darkness, not because it is evil, but because it is courageous enough to evolve. You have felt this within you, haven't you? That ache for more. That sacred unrest, that hunger for something beyond the surface. That is Luciferic energy misunderstood by systems that need you docile, but revered in philosophies that value personal evolution. This inner light, when awakened, doesn't destroy your connection to the divine, it deepens it. It doesn't make you arrogant, it makes you sovereign, but those in control have never feared your evil. They feared your empowerment. To understand this deeper, look at the myth of Prometheus, the one who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. He was punished, bound, and condemned. Not for bringing destruction, but for bringing enlightenment. Fire is knowledge, power, illumination. Prometheus is a parallel to Lucifer, a figure who defies divine authority to awaken others. In both myths, fire is the gift of transformation. The rebel is not evil, he is necessary. Without that divine fire, humanity remains cold, unconscious, asleep. But in the hands of empire, these stories were flipped. The light-bringer was turned into the enemy. The rebel became the devil, and fire, the very element that symbolizes purification and rebirth, was made into a symbol of hell. Do you see it now? The greatest trick wasn't that Lucifer fell from grace, it's that you were taught to fear the fall itself. That descent into your own darkness, your own questions, your own doubts, was demonized. You were told to stay safe in the light handed to you, instead of finding the light that lives within you. The fall from heaven is not the beginning of evil, it's the beginning of awareness. It's the sacred disobedience that breaks the trance. It's the moment your soul says, there must be more than this. That is the true meaning of the fall. It's not about arrogance, it's about awakening. It's about the soul choosing experience over ignorance, truth over comfort, liberation over loyalty to systems that do not serve its growth. And the ones who told you this was sin were the very ones who feared losing their hold on you. The deeper you go, the more you realize. This isn't about a character in a story. It's about you. It's always been about you. You are the one who carries the light. You are the one who has questioned the lies. You are the one who has felt the fire of truth burning inside your chest, even when everyone around you stayed silent. That's Luciferic energy. That's divine rebellion. That's the light within you that refuses to die. And yet, because you've been taught to fear that fire, you've kept it hidden. You've apologized for it. You've tried to extinguish it with conformity, with politeness, with spiritual suppression. But fire doesn't go away just because it's feared. It waits, it smolders, and when the moment comes, it rises not to destroy you, but to return you to yourself. That's the invitation Lucifer gives you, not to worship a fallen angel, but to rise as a sovereign being, to reclaim the light you were told to hide. This is not about choosing between good and evil, it's about transcending that illusion entirely. The Lucifer archetype doesn't ask you to abandon love, it asks you to awaken to a higher form of it. One that includes truth, one that includes freedom, one that dares to challenge lies in the name of the sacred. That is not evil, that is courage. And yet, you've been warned against this courage your whole life. You've been told to submit, to obey, to fear questioning. But ask yourself, who benefits from a world where no one questions? Who profits from your silence? Who stays in power when you dim your light? It was never the divine who needed your submission. It was the system. The divine gave you the flame. The system tried to steal it. You were told the fall from heaven was a tragedy. But maybe it was a choice, a sacred one. The choice to forget in order to remember. The choice to step into density so that you could know what it means to rise. The light you carry is not borrowed, it's yours. It is the fire that lights the path forward not just for you, but for others still trapped in the fear you've begun to outgrow. So no, Lucifer was never your enemy. The light bearer was never here to steal your soul, only to remind you that it was never lost. The fall was never a curse, it was the beginning of the climb. And the fire? That was always the blessing. When you embrace this part of yourself, the part that dares to defy lies, that dares to seek truth, that dares to shine in places others fear, you don't fall further, you rise higher. You don't descend into chaos, you return to wholeness. And in that wholeness, you see clearly, the light you feared was the light you are. What if I told you that the story of the Garden of Eden, the one you were taught to accept as the origin of sin, was never about disobedience or moral failure? What if it was never meant to shame you, but instead, to wake you up? That hidden beneath the layers of guilt and punishment lies a message so powerful, so liberating, that entire systems of control had to twist it just to keep you from seeing it. The garden was never about sin, it was about awakening. And everything you thought you knew about it deserves to be seen again with new eyes. From the moment you heard the story, you were taught to associate knowledge with danger, the serpent with evil, and Eve's curiosity with catastrophe. You were told that a single act of defiance corrupted all of humanity, that the desire to know just to know was enough to bring about a cosmic fall. But pause for a moment and ask yourself, why would a loving creator place a tree of knowledge in the center of paradise, only to forbid it? Why place it within reach if it was never meant to be touched? This was not a trap, it was a choice, an invitation. And the real tragedy is not that the fruit was eaten, but that we've been taught to fear what it represented ever since. The tree of knowledge wasn't about good and evil as black and white moral categories. It was about consciousness, awareness, the transition from innocence into knowing. Eating the fruit wasn't an act of corruption, it was the first step into divine self-awareness. Before the fruit, Adam and Eve were unaware. They existed in a state of unconscious harmony, like children before language. The moment they ate, they became aware of themselves, of their bodies, of duality. This wasn't a fall, it was a shift. The so-called fall was actually a rise in consciousness, a movement from sleep to wakefulness. And what was the catalyst for that awakening? The serpent. Now ask yourself, why has the serpent been painted as the ultimate deceiver when it was the only character in the story, encouraging them to seek wisdom? Why is the one who says, "Your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil," considered evil? Because the serpent wasn't tempting them with destruction, it was offering them perspective. And if you trace the serpent beyond the surface, you'll find that it appears again and again across spiritual traditions, not as a villain, but as a symbol of divine energy. In ancient spiritual systems, especially in Eastern philosophies, the serpent represents Kundalini, the dormant spiritual energy coiled at the base of your spine. When awakened, this energy rises through your chakras, opening your consciousness, elevating your awareness, and bringing you into alignment with your higher self. The serpent doesn't destroy you, it transforms you. It burns away illusion and leads you into truth. So what if the serpent in Eden wasn't a deceiver, but a guide? What if it represented that inner energy within all of us, that force that dares to question, dares to seek, dares to know? They don't want you to see the story this way. Because if you did, you'd realize that sin as they taught it was never about breaking rules. It was about breaking free. The entire idea of original sin rests on the notion that seeking knowledge is rebellion, that awakening is wrong, that your desire to evolve is dangerous. But what if sin was a metaphor? What if it represented the moment a soul awakens from slumber and begins the sacred process of becoming? That would mean you were never fallen, you were rising. Consider the shame that immediately followed the awakening in the story. Adam and Eve realize they are naked, they hide, they feel fear. But why? Because they were told they had done wrong. But the act itself, the moment of realization, was neutral. It was the interpretation that created the shame. And that's exactly how the system still works today. You wake up, you start asking questions. You begin to feel the stirrings of something deeper, and immediately, you're told to fear it, to hide it, to suppress it. The original lie wasn't the serpent's message, it was the narrative that framed awakening as sin. For centuries, this story has been weaponized to teach obedience. You were told that questioning is wrong, that women are temptresses, that knowledge leads to ruin. But all of that was constructed to keep you from seeing what's really at stake. Because if the garden represents your inner state before awakening, and the tree symbolizes divine knowledge, then the entire story is an allegory for your own evolution. You were never meant to stay in Eden. You were meant to awaken. You were meant to eat the fruit. You were meant to evolve beyond innocence into wisdom. And yes, that journey includes discomfort. It includes loss, pain, duality, and complexity. But it also includes truth, power, freedom, and purpose. The garden was the beginning, not the destination. And the serpent? It was never your enemy. It was the inner whisper calling you to remember who you are. The same whisper that lives in you now, telling you to question the narratives you've inherited, telling you to rise beyond shame and fear into sovereignty. Sin was the word used to describe what happens when you step outside the lines. But maybe those lines were never divine in the first place. Maybe they were drawn by those who feared what would happen if you truly knew yourself. What would happen if you realized that knowledge is not separation, it's reunion. That awakening is not rebellion, it's remembrance. That the fall was not the end. It was the beginning of the real story. You were told to fear your awakening. But the truth is, that fear was someone else's projection. The real danger was never the serpent or the fruit, it was the power you would reclaim once you tasted it. Because once you awaken, you can't unsee. You can't return to ignorance. And you can no longer be controlled. The garden wasn't lost. It was left behind. You walked out, not because you were banished, but because your soul chose the path of experience. And along that path, you will face trials, yes, but you will also uncover wisdom. You will encounter shadows, yes, but you will also ignite light. That is the sacred spiral of growth, and that is why the story had to be rewritten, to make you fear your own evolution. But you are not here to stay asleep. You are not here to follow blindly. You are not here to sit quietly in a paradise that demands your ignorance. You are here to awaken, to rise, to remember the divinity encoded in your very being. You are here to eat the fruit, to embody the serpent, to walk out of the garden with your head held high, not as a sinner, but as a soul reclaiming its fire. The garden was never about sin. It was always about sovereignty, and you were never the fallen. You were always the one who dared to rise. What if I told you that hell isn't a place beneath the earth, filled with fire and demons, but a program running in your mind? What if the fiery pit you've been taught to fear your whole life was never meant to be taken literally? And what if the true purpose of hell wasn't to describe divine justice, but to ensure your submission? The belief in eternal punishment was not passed down from the heavens. It was constructed here on this earth, by systems that understood one simple truth: nothing controls the masses more efficiently than fear. From the time you were old enough to comprehend language, the word hell has carried weight. It was whispered from pulpits, painted on canvas, etched into stone, and burned into your subconscious. You were told that if you disobeyed, if you doubted, if you wandered too far from the approved path, you'd suffer forever. Think about that. Eternity. Not a year, not a century, but unending agony for the sin of being human. Does that sound like a divine plan? Or does it sound like psychological conditioning? The truth is, the doctrine of hell as a place of fire and torment isn't a universal spiritual truth. It's a religious invention. The ancient texts and oral traditions that predate organized religion had vastly different understandings of the afterlife, many of them based on cycles, renewal, and vibrational progression. But as institutions rose to power, they needed something more absolute, something that would stop people from questioning authority, from seeking their own path, from accessing the divine within. So they created a place of punishment so terrifying that no one would dare disobey. This wasn't just a myth, it was a control mechanism. The idea of hell was engineered to shape behavior, to police thought, to suppress inquiry. It became the ultimate threat: do what we say, believe what we tell you, or suffer for all eternity. It replaced spiritual sovereignty with spiritual submission. And once that fear took root, it was passed down generation after generation, not as a question, but as an unquestionable truth. But ask yourself this: would a loving source, one of infinite intelligence and compassion, really design a system where a soul is punished forever, with no possibility of healing, growth, or redemption? Would an eternal consciousness, capable of creating galaxies, need to torture its creations to make a point? Or does that sound more like the tactics of human power structures projecting their own fears and desires onto the divine? If hell was real in the way you were taught, wouldn't there be some kind of spiritual consistency across cultures? But there isn't. The fiery hell popularized in modern religion is largely absent from the oldest spiritual systems. In ancient Egyptian texts, the soul undergoes judgment, yes, but it is offered balance and transformation. In Eastern philosophies, there are karmic consequences and realms of learning, but not eternal damnation. Even in early mystical branches of Western religion, the afterlife was seen as a process, not a sentence. The concept of an eternal, punitive hell didn't fully form until specific religious powers needed to weaponize it. And here's where things get even more revealing. Countless people across the world have had near-death experiences, moments where they were clinically dead, only to return with profound insights. And the overwhelming majority of those experiences speak of light, love, peace, and unity, not flames and torture. They speak of unconditional acceptance, of expanded consciousness, of returning home. Even those who initially encounter darkness often describe it not as punishment, but as a state of confusion, a reflection of their own unresolved fears, fears that dissolve the moment they remember love. That's not hell, that's healing. These first-hand experiences defy the rigid doctrine of eternal punishment. They suggest that what we call hell isn't a divine sentence, it's a vibrational state, a state of inner torment, of separation from truth, of being trapped in the illusions of fear, guilt, shame, and disconnection. And here's the key: you don't have to die to be in hell. People live in it every day, not because of some cosmic judgment, but because they've internalized the very beliefs that were meant to keep them imprisoned. Hell is the belief that you are unworthy. Hell is the voice that tells you you're too far gone. Hell is the system that convinces you to suppress your light out of fear of punishment. It's not flames, it's forgetting. It's the ache of spiritual amnesia, the pain of thinking you are alone, abandoned, or broken. And just like you were taught to fear hell after death, you were also taught to normalize the experience of it while alive. Depression, shame, self-hate, spiritual anxiety, all symptoms of a deeper distortion. One that says, you must earn love, suffer for truth, fear awakening. But the truth is, love does not require suffering. Consciousness does not demand fear. The divine does not threaten with punishment, it invites with presence. You were not created to grovel, you were created to grow. And that growth cannot happen in a system built on fear. That's why the programming runs so deep, because, if you ever saw that hell was not a place, but a belief, you'd stop giving your power to those who profit from your fear. So much of the world's dysfunction stems from this unconscious programming. People stay in toxic relationships, oppressive systems, and repressive belief structures, because they've been told they'll suffer even worse if they leave. But what if it's the opposite? What if the real suffering is in staying small? What if the real hell is the one where you never remember who you are? You are not here to be punished, you are here to awaken. And every fear-based image of hell you've been shown was a projection, an echo of someone else's unhealed pain, institutionalized as spiritual fact. But you don't have to carry that anymore. You can choose to rewrite it. You can choose to remember that consciousness evolves, that love transforms, and that the soul's journey is never about punishment, it's about progression. The fire you were taught to fear isn't outside of you, it's within you, and it doesn't burn to destroy, it burns to purify, to burn away illusion, to ignite truth, to fuel transformation. You are not here to fear that fire, you are here to become it. So, the next time the shadow of hell rises in your mind, ask yourself, whose voice is this? Who gave me this image? Who benefits from me believing it? And what would happen if I let it go? What would happen if I replaced fear with curiosity, shame with self-inquiry, punishment with possibility? Because once you understand that hell is not a place you go to but a state you rise out of, you begin to reclaim your soul from centuries of spiritual manipulation. And the moment you do, everything changes. You realize there's nothing to fear, only illusions to unlearn, and light to remember. What if I told you that the devil wasn't created to describe evil, but to monopolize salvation? That the image of a red-skinned, horned deceiver lurking in shadows wasn't born from divine revelation, but from institutional strategy? If you follow the fear far enough, if you trace the myth back to its source, you'll find something chilling. The devil has always been less about your soul and more about your control. Because as long as someone can convince you that you're in danger, they can sell you the solution. And the devil? He's been the most profitable fear ever sold. Look closer, and you'll see that the concept of the devil has always served the same function: to centralize power, to turn spirituality from a personal journey into a controlled marketplace. Once the devil became real in people's minds, salvation could be marketed like a product. You sin, you suffer, they save. But only if you follow their rules, their rituals, their authority. It's not about truth, it's about obedience. Institutions found their strongest weapon in a character they created, an eternal villain who justified eternal loyalty to them. And it worked. For centuries, fear of the devil filled pews, built empires, and silenced entire generations from seeking their own path. This wasn't accidental, it was intentional. When you control the villain, you control the narrative. And in every great narrative, a villain makes a hero necessary. So, religious institutions appointed themselves as the hero. They cast themselves as the only ones who could rescue you from damnation, but only after they convinced you that damnation was your default state. That you were born broken, that you came into this world already unworthy. It's a twisted kind of genius. First, teach people that they are lost, then sell them the only map back to God. And it wasn't just theological. It was psychological. The devil wasn't just externalized as a cosmic enemy. He was internalized as guilt. You began to believe that your desires were dangerous, your thoughts were shameful, your questions were rebellious, your natural curiosity became suspicious, your inner wisdom was framed as temptation. Slowly, you were taught to doubt yourself, to see your instincts as sinful. And just like that, the devil took residence in your own mind not as a being, but as a belief system. This belief system whispered that you weren't enough, that your access to the divine required intermediaries, that you could never be trusted with your own spirit. And once you believed that, you were willing to give away your power. You were willing to bow, to confess, to tithe, to obey not from love, but from fear. The devil made it all possible. Not the actual being, the concept, the fear of falling, of burning, of being cast out. That fear became the currency of control. But who truly benefits from this? Not the divine. The divine doesn't need fear to reach you. The divine doesn't require rituals to love you. But institutions, they thrive on fear. Fear ensures compliance. Fear keeps you coming back. Fear makes you easier to manipulate, easier to predict, easier to govern. And once you're afraid of yourself, afraid of your thoughts, your intuition, your power, they don't even have to watch you. You'll self-police. You'll do their job for them. It goes deeper. For most of history, spiritual power wasn't just restricted, it was reserved. Reserved for priests, popes, prophets, and mystics in robes. Reserved for those sanctioned by the system. While you were told to repent, they were communing with the divine behind closed doors. While you were labeled sinful for asking questions, they built secret libraries, encoded sacred geometry, and preserved ancient wisdom only for the elite. Why? Because knowledge is power, and the less you know about your own divinity, the more dependent you become on theirs. The devil was the gatekeeper. The bogeyman used to keep you away from spiritual sovereignty. Every time you reached for truth, you were warned, the devil might deceive you. Every time you dared to explore other paths, other cultures, other teachings, you were told it was dangerous, that demons might trick you, that only your religion, your book, your doctrine could keep you safe. But safe from what? Not from evil, safe from freedom, because true spiritual freedom doesn't serve empire, it doesn't tithe, it doesn't kneel, it doesn't beg for mercy from a punishment it no longer believes in. The devil gave the system a scapegoat for every question it couldn't answer. Why do people suffer? The devil. Why do bad things happen? The devil. Why are your prayers unanswered? The devil. Meanwhile, the very real human corruption happening in those same institutions went unchecked, because it's easier to fear a mythical being than to confront human systems that exploit belief for profit. And it's not just religion. This programming seeps into education, media, politics, anything that teaches you to fear yourself, to distrust your emotions, suppress your sensuality, reject your inner voice, is using the same playbook. Because once you're convinced that power is dangerous in your hands, you'll hand it over gladly. That's what the devil mythology was always about, keeping you from realizing you never needed a savior to begin with. Imagine what changes the moment you stop believing you were born broken. Imagine the weight that lifts when you stop fearing divine punishment. Imagine the power that returns when you realize you are not in danger for trusting yourself. That's what they've tried to prevent for centuries. Not to protect your soul, to protect their control. So the question is no longer, do I believe in the devil? The question is, who benefits from me believing in him? Who gains when I'm afraid to explore? Who wins when I stay small? Who profits when I see my body as sinful, my mind as dangerous, and my soul as untrustworthy? The answer is clear, not you. And that's the greatest lie of all. That you were meant to be saved by something outside of you, when in truth, you were always meant to remember what's already within. The devil was never your enemy. He was their invention, their insurance policy, their masterpiece of manipulation. But now you see through it. And once you see, you can't unsee. Once you name the lie, it loses its power. And once you reclaim your spiritual authority, you don't need their permission to walk in truth. You were never meant to be afraid of your consciousness. You were meant to awaken it. And the ones who fear that awakening are the ones who taught you to fear yourself. What if I told you that the devil you fear isn't lurking in shadows or tempting you from the outside, but living within the parts of you you've been taught to reject. That the evil you were warned about might actually be your disowned brilliance, your unloved truth, your unexpressed fire. It sounds unsettling, maybe even offensive to the conditioned mind. But what if the devil isn't some cosmic villain trying to steal your soul, but a symbol of the war you're fighting with yourself? A war between who you are and who you've been told it's safe to be. Every human being carries a shadow. It's not unique to you, or to the bad people, or to those who've made mistakes. It's part of being conscious. The shadow isn't evil, it's unconscious. It's made of all the parts of yourself that you weren't allowed to express, all the emotions, impulses, desires, and instincts that were judged, shamed, or denied. You weren't born afraid of these parts. You were taught to be, and so you buried them. You pushed them down because someone once flinched when you got too loud, because you were told not to cry, not to rage, not to want too much, because expressing your truth felt like a threat to love, safety, or belonging. That's how the devil took root, not as a being, but as a buried self. Repression doesn't make your darkness disappear. It just drives it underground, where it grows hungry, twisted, distorted. That's what creates your inner demons, not your nature, but your resistance to it. When you deny your anger, it becomes resentment. When you deny your sadness, it becomes despair. When you deny your power, it becomes projection. The devil within isn't trying to destroy you, it's trying to get your attention. It's the voice that says, "See me, feel me, integrate me." Not so it can take over, but so it can stop screaming for love in the only way it knows how. The more you repress, the louder your shadow becomes. And it doesn't just show up in moments of stress or trauma, it sneaks into your thoughts, your relationships, your patterns. It disguises itself as the friend you keep sabotaging, the lover you keep resenting, the body you keep judging. It's the part of you that lies when you want to speak, that conforms when you want to scream. It is not your enemy, it is your unlived life. The mistake most people make is trying to exorcise this part of themselves, to cleanse it, kill it, pray it away. That's what religion taught you, right? That anything dark within you must be cast out. That the devil must be resisted, banished. But how can you heal what you won't face? How can you become whole when you're still cutting parts of yourself out like spiritual tumors? The path isn't exorcism, it's integration. That doesn't mean indulging every impulse or acting out your wounds, it means understanding them, listening to them, welcoming the lost parts of yourself home. When you do that, something miraculous happens. The devil begins to transform. The anger becomes clarity. The fear becomes compassion. The desire becomes purpose. That's alchemy. That's the real spiritual work, not pretending to be pure, but becoming whole. You've been taught that light is good and dark is bad, but that's a childish oversimplification. Night isn't evil, it's necessary. The womb is dark, the soil is dark, the stars are born in darkness. Your healing lives in the dark. And every time you turn away from it, every time you judge your sadness, suppress your sexuality, silence your rage, you turn away from a piece of your own power. Because make no mistake, the parts of you that were demonized are often the ones carrying your greatest medicine. Your rage is sacred. It tells you where your boundaries are. Your grief is holy. It reveals what you loved. Your ambition, your sensuality, your passion, all of these are wild currents of life moving through you, but when they're repressed, they get distorted. That's when you start to fear yourself. That's when the devil takes shape, not because you're bad, but because you've been divided. True healing isn't about conquering your demons, it's about learning their language. It's sitting with your shame and asking what it's protecting. It's holding your jealousy and seeing the hunger underneath. It's touching your rage and feeling the betrayal that lives inside it. When you stop running from your shadow, it stops chasing you. It doesn't vanish, it integrates. And what once felt like the devil becomes your teacher. This is the sacred irony. The thing you were taught to fear the most is the very thing that will set you free. But freedom requires courage. It requires looking at yourself without judgment. It requires dismantling the programming that says you have to be pure, perfect, or positive all the time. That's not enlightenment. That's spiritual avoidance. Real growth is messy. Real awakening is raw. It happens in the trenches of your own psyche, where light and dark wrestle not for dominance, but for union. You can't heal by amputating parts of yourself. You heal by becoming so radically honest, so deeply compassionate, so fiercely self-aware, that no part of you has to hide anymore. That's what integration means. It's not spiritual bypassing. It's not pretending your trauma made you stronger. It's not labeling everything love and light, while avoiding the real pain. It's looking your inner devil in the eyes and saying, I see you, I hear you, and I'm ready to become whole. When you walk that path, you stop projecting your darkness onto others. You stop needing an external devil to blame. You stop fearing your own power, and you begin to embody the truth that's been buried beneath centuries of shame. You were never divided to begin with. You were always complete. The devil within wasn't a flaw, it was a fragment, and now, it wants to come home. So no, you don't need to fear the shadow inside you. You need to meet it. You need to sit with it. You need to understand that it's not here to destroy your light, it's here to deepen it, to ground it, to make it real. Because light that has never met darkness is fragile. But light that has danced with the dark, that has wept, screamed, surrendered, and risen, is unshakable. The devil within you is not your downfall, it's your doorway, and the moment you walk through it, you'll realize that you were never meant to fight your shadow, you were meant to embrace it. What if I told you that the path to your light doesn't begin in the heavens, but in the depths of your own shadow? That before you rise, you must descend, not because you're being punished, but because your power is buried in the places you've been taught to fear. What if everything you thought was wrong with you was never wrong at all, just misunderstood, unloved, unintegrated? You weren't born broken, you were born whole. And the journey back to that wholeness begins the moment you stop running from your darkness and start meeting it face to face. Shadow work is not a trendy concept or a self-help buzzword. It's a sacred rite of passage. It's what every awakened soul eventually confronts, the honest reckoning with the parts of yourself that have been denied, suppressed, and exiled. These aren't just your flaws or mistakes, they're the fragmented aspects of your being that have been labeled bad, wrong, or even evil, not because they are, but because someone once told you they were. Shadow work means calling those parts back, sitting with them, listening to them, not to fix them, but to understand them. You've spent so much of your life trying to be good, trying to be accepted, trying to be light, and yet, in that very pursuit, you've cast pieces of yourself into the dark. The angry you, the sexual you, the jealous you, the grieving, wild, rebellious, powerful you. You buried those aspects beneath layers of shame and silence, thinking you were becoming more spiritual, more worthy, more lovable. But all you were really doing was splitting from your truth, because the light you seek can't be found by pretending to be pure. It's found by becoming whole. Meeting your shadow isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you to hide. It's about turning toward the parts of you that still feel unworthy, unlovable, too much, or not enough, and saying, you belong here. When you do that, your soul begins to expand. Not with perfection, but with truth, because truth is what frees you. And there is no deeper truth than this: you are both light and shadow, and both are sacred. The moment you face your darkness, you reclaim your power. That's the paradox most people never understand. Your fear, your anger, your shame, these aren't barriers to your growth. They are the gateway. The sooner you stop trying to escape them and start trying to understand them, the sooner your suffering begins to dissolve. Because suffering is the result of resisting what island healing begins when you accept it, when you lean in, when you realize that your shadow isn't your enemy, it's your teacher. And yes, it will test you. It will ask you to sit in discomfort. It will bring you face to face with your own illusions, your projections, your buried pain. But every piece of darkness you integrate becomes a part of your strength. Every wound you tend to becomes a source of wisdom. Every part of yourself you stop judging begins to transform. And in that process, you stop fearing the devil because you realize the devil was never trying to destroy you. He was trying to wake you up. The devil, as an archetype, is the perfect scapegoat for everything we don't want to face: desire, rebellion, temptation, instinct, shadow. Instead of confronting these forces within ourselves, we project them outward. We label them demonic, evil, wrong. But what if the devil isn't a tormentor, but a mirror? A mirror that reflects the parts of you that religion, society, and even your family told you to disown. Not because they were unholy, but because they couldn't be controlled. You see, the devil becomes your teacher the moment you stop seeing him as something outside of you, because then you start to realize every sin you were warned about has a deeper root: lust, a distorted longing for intimacy; wrath, a cry for justice; pride, a hunger to be seen; greed, a response to lack. When you meet the shadow underneath these impulses, you don't just become a better person, you become more conscious, you evolve, you embody your humanity and your divinity, not in opposition, but in harmony. This is not about justifying harm or indulging unconscious behavior. It's about radical honesty. It's about taking responsibility for your inner world. When you ignore your shadow, it controls you from the dark. But when you face it, you take the wheel. You move from reaction to response, from fear to awareness, from fragmentation to integration. That's what shadow work does. It restores your power by reconnecting you with everything you've lost along the way. Think about the moments in your life that broke you open: the heartbreak, the betrayal, the rage, the loss. Were they comfortable? No. Were they transformative? Absolutely. Because light is not the absence of darkness. It is the ability to carry darkness with compassion. And that ability only comes through facing it, through honoring your shadow, not as a flaw, but as part of your divine curriculum. You were not born to bypass your pain. You were born to transmute it. You were not born to fight your shadow. You were born to dance with it. Every archetype of true transformation across mythology, spirituality, and psychology involves descent. Inanna went to the underworld. Jesus went to the desert. Buddha sat with Mara. This isn't coincidence. It's cosmic design. The shadow is not an obstacle to your enlightenment. It is the threshold. And when you cross that threshold, when you choose to meet yourself fully, you become unstoppable. You stop living in fear of being too much. You stop editing your truth to make others comfortable. You stop outsourcing your worth to systems that profit from your self-doubt. You become sovereign, rooted, whole. Not because you've eradicated your darkness, but because you've woven it into your light. So if you want to awaken, don't run from your shadow, run toward it. Sit with your discomfort, journal your rage, feel your shame without flinching, ask the questions that make your voice shake. Because on the other side of that trembling is truth, and on the other side of truth is freedom, and on the other side of freedom is love. Not conditional love, not sanitized love, but wild, radiant, unconditional love. The kind that doesn't require perfection, only presence. You will never become whole by amputating parts of yourself. You become whole by remembering that every piece of you, even the ones you were taught to fear, belongs. That's what it means to walk the path of light, not to ascend above your humanity, but to descend into it with reverence. To meet your shadow and say, I am ready to see you. I am ready to love you. I am ready to become all of me. Because the devil you were warned about isn't waiting to drag you down. He's waiting for you to wake up, to reclaim your fire, to remember that facing your darkness doesn't dim your light, it makes it unshakable. What if I told you that rebellion isn't a sin, it's sacred? That the very fire you were told to fear might be the key to your freedom? For too long, you've been conditioned to associate questioning with danger, to see rebellion as the path to ruin. But what if it's the opposite? What if your willingness to challenge, to break away, to awaken, is not your downfall, but your destiny? The world has always punished those who dare to think for themselves. But look closely, and you'll see something powerful. The ones accused of heresy were often the ones carrying truth. From childhood, you were taught to obey, to comply, to never color outside the lines of what's considered holy, moral, or acceptable. But every great spiritual revolution began with someone who refused to follow blindly. Someone who said, "This doesn't feel right. This doesn't resonate." Rebellion, at its core, is not about destruction. It's about realignment. It's about listening to your own inner compass when everything around you demands silence. And the truth is, the spark of rebellion doesn't come from the devil. It comes from your soul remembering what freedom feels like. When you study the lives of saints, mystics, prophets, and visionaries, a pattern emerges. Almost every one of them was accused of blasphemy, of sorcery, of challenging divine order. But they weren't defying the divine, so's. They were defying systems that claimed to speak for it. They weren't heretics in the eyes of God. They were heretics in the eyes of control. The fire within them wasn't dangerous. It was illuminating. And that illumination threatened those who relied on spiritual darkness to maintain power. The mystic who saw visions beyond scripture. The healer who used herbs and intuition instead of ritual and doctrine. The seeker who dared to ask, "What if there's more than what I've been told?" All of them felt the same fire you feel now. The one that burns in your gut when you hear something that doesn't align. The one that lights up in your chest when you're being called to grow. That fire is divine. It's not a curse. It's a compass. And the reason it's been labeled as demonic is simple. It can't be controlled. Suppressed knowledge has always held the keys to liberation. That's why it's hidden. Not because you can't handle it, but because it would dismantle the very foundations of spiritual dependence. Imagine what would happen if you discovered that divinity doesn't live in a book, or a building, or a figurehead, but in your own breath, in your body, in your stillness, in your fire. That kind of awareness doesn't bow, it doesn't tithe, it doesn't shrink, it reclaims. And that reclamation is dangerous to any system built on fear. That's why the truth has always been encoded in symbols, myths, and metaphors. It had to be, because the literal world could never hold it. Because if truth were spoken plainly, it would be silenced. So it was whispered through the Gnostics, sung by Sufi poets, hidden in alchemical texts, and preserved in the chants of indigenous elders. Those weren't fringe beliefs. They were lifelines, messages left behind by awakened ones who knew this moment would come. The moment when you would start to remember. And remembering isn't safe, it's disruptive. It shakes the structures inside you that were built on borrowed beliefs. It calls you to examine everything, your religion, your relationships, your reasons. It's messy, but that mess is sacred, because without it, you can't be reborn. The fire that destroys the old is the same fire that clears the space for the new, and you're not being punished for touching it. You're being initiated. There's a reason you feel restless when something doesn't resonate. There's a reason you feel alive when you follow your truth. That's your soul responding to the call. Not the call to conform, the call to evolve. Rebellion, in this context, is not about ego or arrogance. It's about spiritual integrity. It's about refusing to betray your inner knowing for the comfort of outer approval. Think about the stories you've been told about fire. Prometheus, who stole it from the gods to bring it to humanity. Lucifer, whose name literally means light bringer. These beings weren't trying to destroy humanity, they were trying to awaken it, but they were cast as villains because their light exposed too much. Because they dared to challenge the status quo, and the system had to twist their stories to keep you from following their example. But here you are, standing at the same edge, feeling the same fire, hearing the same call. Will you believe the stories that say your power is dangerous? Or will you write a new one that says your power is divine? Because the truth is, questioning isn't rebellion against God, it's communion with the God within you. And every sacred question you ask peels back another layer of programming. Every time you say, "That doesn't sit right with me," you get closer to your essence. This is not about rejecting everything you've ever learned. It's about discerning what's true for you. It's about realizing that spiritual maturity doesn't come from memorizing doctrine. It comes from living in alignment, from trusting your own experiences, from honoring the fire that guides you even when no one else understands it. Especially then, that fire is holy. It's the same fire that burned in the bellies of prophets, the same fire that fueled revolutions of consciousness, the same fire that says, you don't have to be afraid anymore. You don't have to pretend. You don't have to ask for permission to awaken. That fire didn't come from darkness. It came from Source. It is Source, expressing through your defiance, through your voice, through your refusal to forget who you are. You were never meant to be docile. You were never meant to be tamed. You were meant to burn, to illuminate, to liberate. And if that makes you a heretic in the eyes of the old world, so be it. The old world is crumbling anyway. You're not here to preserve it. You're here to birth something new. So let the fire within you grow. Let it burn through every lie you inherited. Let it scorch the guilt, the shame, the fear that kept you silent. Let it awaken the warrior mystic, the rebel sage, the sovereign soul who remembers. Rebellion is not a sin, it's a ceremony, and the devil you feared for rebelling was just the fire you weren't yet ready to hold. Now you are. What if I told you that the devil only has power over you as long as you keep giving your power away? That fear is the leash, and you are the one holding it. For centuries, you were trained to see yourself as small, fragile, and in constant danger of being misled by dark forces. You were taught to fear your own thoughts, your own instincts, your own curiosity. And yet, beneath all that programming, there's always been a whisper inside you, quiet but steady, reminding you that true divinity doesn't demand obedience. It invites awakening. You were not born to blindly follow, you were born to discern. And discernment requires presence, not fear. It asks you to stay awake, to question, to feel deeply, to listen not just to what you've been told, but to what resonates in your bones. This is the essence of spiritual sovereignty. Not rebellion for rebellion's sake, not ego disguised as enlightenment, but a deep-rooted knowing that your connection to the divine is direct, sacred, and unbreakable. You do not need an intermediary, you do not need permission, you do not need to fear. The narrative of the devil was always designed to interrupt that knowing. It told you that your soul was inherently flawed, that without salvation, you were doomed. But look closely, and you'll see the pattern. Fear is always the foundation, not love, not truth. Fear. You were taught that questioning doctrine was dangerous, that following your intuition could lead you astray, that certain thoughts, certain books, certain ideas could open you to darkness. And so, you stayed small, you stayed loyal, you stayed safe on the outside. But inside, your soul knew better. Because the more awake you become, the more that narrative starts to fall apart. You begin to see the inconsistencies. You notice that the things labeled demonic are often just powerful, that your inner voice, once feared as a potential deceiver, is actually the only compass that's never lied to you. The devil narrative begins to collapse the moment you trust your own experience more than someone else's authority. And when that collapse happens, something extraordinary is born: sovereignty. Sovereignty is not a rejection of the sacred, it is a return to it. It's you choosing, moment by moment, to be your own source of truth, to take what resonates and leave the rest, to honor your path without needing to make others wrong for theirs. That's real power, not the kind that dominates, but the kind that liberates. When you are sovereign, no one can manipulate you with fear. Not a preacher, not a doctrine, not even your own inner critic, because you no longer serve fear, you serve truth. This is where your inner story begins to shift. You stop casting yourself as the sinner, the seeker, the unworthy one. You stop waiting for rescue, you stop apologizing for existing, and instead, you rise. You become the hero of your own spiritual journey, not because you've figured everything out, but because you've remembered that you are the one walking the path, no one else. You start to ask different questions, not, what should I believe, but, what feels true in my soul? Not, who will save me, but, what am I being called to remember? And when you start asking those questions, the spell breaks. You see how deeply the fear was embedded in your psyche, how you hesitated to even think certain thoughts, how you flinched at your own power, how you edited yourself to fit into someone else's version of holiness. But now, you are rewriting the story, not with vengeance, not with bitterness, with clarity, with love. You begin to see the devil not as a real entity, but as a metaphor, an outdated symbol for the parts of you that have long been rejected, misunderstood, or suppressed. And you stop fighting shadows, you start reclaiming them. Discernment becomes your new compass. Not blind faith, not guilt, discernment. You begin to feel the difference between control and truth, between manipulation and wisdom. You recognize the tone of fear, the urgency, the panic, the guilt, trip wrapped in sacred language, and you choose not to follow it, not because you're rebellious, but because you're free. Because anything that tries to control you through fear is not of the light. Anything that silences your voice, shames your path, or disconnects you from your own divinity is not truth, it's programming. You start to understand that your mind, your body, your soul, all of it is sacred. Your desires aren't sinful, they're signposts. Your curiosity isn't dangerous, it's divine. Even your doubts are holy, they're the beginning of deeper understanding. You no longer fear making mistakes on your spiritual path, because you know the path is not linear, it's cyclical, alive, always unfolding, and you trust yourself to walk it, one step at a time, guided not by fear of damnation, but by love of truth. This kind of sovereignty doesn't mean you isolate yourself or reject all spiritual teachings. It means you engage with them consciously. You can honor sacred texts, rituals, and traditions, but not because you've been told to, because they resonate with something real inside you, and if they don't, you let them go. No shame, no guilt, just alignment. You may lose things on this path. You may lose approval. You may lose old identities, old communities, even old relationships. But what you gain is so much greater. You gain yourself. You gain freedom. You gain the ability to look at your own reflection without flinching. And when you can do that, when you can stand fully in who you are, unafraid, unashamed, you realize something profound. The devil was never real. The real illusion was the belief that you were not enough. You were always enough. You were always divine. You were always capable of discerning truth for yourself. And now, you're remembering. You're stepping out of the prison of fear and into the temple of sovereignty. No more begging for worthiness. No more seeking outside of yourself for what's always lived within. You are not a sinner needing saving. You are a soul reclaiming its light. So when they ask you why you no longer believe in the devil, tell them the truth, because you've met yourself. And there's nothing to fear there, only fire, only wisdom, only love. You've stopped looking for demons in the dark. You've stopped fearing the fire in your belly. And you've started listening to the voice that was never trying to deceive you, only awaken you. That is the voice of your sovereignty. And it's been waiting for this moment all along. What if I told you that everything you were warned not to explore is exactly what your soul came here to remember? That the forbidden fruit wasn't a trap, but a key. That the whispers of curiosity in your spirit weren't demonic temptation, but a sacred call back to truth. For centuries, you've been told that there are things you shouldn't know. That to question is to rebel. That to seek knowledge outside the approved boundaries is dangerous. But dangerous to who? Not to you. Dangerous to the systems that profit from your silence. You were born with the right to know, not just intellectually, but spiritually. You came into this life carrying wisdom etched into your very being, fragments of truth buried beneath layers of conditioning. You didn't forget because you were broken. You forgot because you were programmed to. And the most effective programming is the kind you don't even realize is there. That's why the devil had to be invented, not to reflect reality, but to guard the doors to your awakening, to scare you away from the very knowledge that would set you free. This so-called forbidden knowledge has always been with you, not outside of you, within. Mystics knew this, Gnostics knew this. The sages and visionaries who walked before you carried this fire, not because they were special, but because they refused to be silenced. They remembered that the universe is not a hierarchy of judgment, but a field of consciousness. That divinity is not a being in the sky, watching you with a list. It is the very breath moving through you. It is awareness, expanding through form. It is the spark in your chest that won't go out, no matter how many times the world tells you to dim. To truly awaken is not to learn something new, it's to remember something ancient, something deep, something sacred. The knowledge you seek is not about dogma or doctrine, it's about inner alignment. It's the kind of knowing that doesn't require proof, because it lives beyond the mind. It lives in your bones, your dreams, your tears, your intuition. And it has been patiently waiting for you to listen. The world has long called this kind of knowing heresy. But ask yourself this: if truth is dangerous, what kind of system are you serving? If seeking wisdom outside the lines is punishable, what exactly are they trying to protect? Not your soul. Your soul is safe, always has been. What they're trying to protect is control. Because once you truly know that you are divine, sovereign, and whole, you stop being manageable. You stop outsourcing your truth. You stop fearing hell. And without fear, their entire system starts to collapse. Gnosticism once held this truth at its core, that the spark of the divine lives within you, and that salvation is not something granted to you, but something remembered through direct experience. Not earned through suffering, but realized through awakening. Gnostic teachings weren't focused on punishment, they were focused on knowledge, inner knowledge, sacred insight, remembrance. That's why they were silenced. Not because they were wrong, but because they were right, in a way that threatened the gatekeepers of spiritual power. Mysticism, across every culture, says the same thing. The divine is not outside of you. You are not separate. You are not lost. You are simply waking up from a dream you were taught to call reality. And in that waking, you begin to question everything you've ever feared. You realize that the devil was never a force working against you. He was the projection of everything you've disowned. A mirror. A myth. A reflection of your own split mind, terrified of its own power. When you look into that mirror without judgment, something radical happens. You stop seeing an enemy, and start seeing a teacher. The parts of you were told to exile, the instincts, the passion, the knowing, the defiance, suddenly reveal themselves not as threats, but as guides. The fire that once burned with shame now glows with clarity. The whispers that once felt dangerous now ring with recognition. You see that your inner conflict was never between good and evil, but between truth and programming. And truth is not always comfortable. It asks you to leave behind what felt safe. It asks you to confront the lies you've built your identity around. But it also gives you something extraordinary in return. Yourself. Not the self that performs, conforms, and obeys, but the self that remembers. That remembers you are part of the fabric of existence itself, that your consciousness is not a mistake, but a miracle, that your questions are sacred, and your seeking is holy. You begin to understand the universe not as a test, but as a teacher, not as a courtroom, but as a classroom. Every challenge is not punishment, it's an invitation. Every heartbreak, every breakdown, every moment of doubt is not evidence of your unworthiness, but proof of your evolution. You are not here to pass some cosmic exam. You are here to remember, to embody, to know. And knowing is power, not the kind that controls others, but the kind that frees yourself. It's the power to say no to manipulation, to stop bowing to fear, to walk away from anything that demands your submission in exchange for love. Because love is not transactional. Divine truth doesn't come with strings attached. It liberates, it expands, it invites, it never threatens. That's how you know the difference between programming and truth, between fear and freedom. Truth will feel like remembering. Programming will feel like shrinking. One will resonate. The other will rattle. One will open your heart. The other will close it. This is your divine right, not just to choose, but to know which is which, to trust your resonance, to reclaim your discernment, to walk the path not of obedience, but of awakening. And when you walk that path, you become sovereign, not above others, but in union with something far greater than control. You become unshakable, because your truth no longer depends on approval, because your faith no longer requires fear, because your relationship with the divine is no longer filtered through someone else's lens. This is your inheritance, to know, to remember, to walk boldly through the doors they told you to fear, to eat the fruit they told you was cursed, to hold the fire they said would burn you, to look into the mirror of the devil and find your own eyes staring back, not in horror, but in recognition. The parts of you that were demonized are the parts most hungry for love, and when you love them, you dissolve the illusion of separation. So reclaim your right, tear up the script of fear, step into the temple of your own knowing. You are not here to be saved, you are here to see, to feel, to awaken. And no gatekeeper, no doctrine, no story of demons and damnation can take that away from you, not anymore. The knowledge you were taught to fear is the knowledge that will set you free. What if I told you that the greatest trick ever played wasn't the invention of evil, but the illusion of separation? That the battle you've been taught to fear, the one between good and evil, angels and demons, light and dark, was never the real war at all? The true conflict is not between two external forces fighting for your soul. It is the internal friction between truth and illusion, remembrance and forgetting, awakening and sleep. and the deeper you look, the more clearly you'll see. The devil is not a warrior in some cosmic war. He's a mask worn by illusion to keep you from seeing what's always been real. This illusion runs deep. It began long before you could name it. From childhood, you were taught in binaries. This is good, that is bad. This is light, that is dark. Follow this, fear that. And while duality can serve as a stepping stone to awareness, it can also become a prison. When taken as absolute, it fragments your understanding of self and spirit. It makes you believe you are torn between two warring natures instead of realizing you are a unified whole, a divine being navigating a world of contrast, not division. The matrix of control thrives on this fragmentation. It's a system that feeds on your confusion. It whispers through institutions, through media, through dogma, convincing you that you must choose sides, pick battles, fight devils, earn salvation. But the truth is, the moment you choose unity over division, the entire illusion starts to collapse. Because unity consciousness doesn't play by those rules. It doesn't operate from fear. It doesn't need an enemy to feel powerful. It's simply island. And in its presence, the stories of war, sin, and separation lose their grip. To see through the illusion, you must first be willing to admit that it exists. That much of what you've been told about reality, especially spiritual reality, was designed not to liberate you, but to bind you. And the most effective way to bind someone is not with chains, but with ideas, with stories that feel true because they've been repeated for generations, with fear disguised as wisdom, with guilt disguised as guidance. This is not to shame those who believed it. It is to awaken those who are ready to see beyond it. You recognize the illusion not by memorizing doctrine, but by tuning into resonance. Illusion always comes with fear, urgency, shame, or hierarchy. It says you must earn your worth. It pits you against others. It defines you by roles and rules. It thrives on control. But truth, real truth, is spacious. It expands you. It liberates your breath. It connects rather than separates. And it does not need to be defended. It simply reveals itself to those willing to look beyond the veil. The devil, in this light, is not a being but a symbol, not an enemy but an echo of all the ways you've been convinced you are separate from source. He is the guardian of illusion, the personification of the fear that tells you you are alone, broken, impure, and unsafe. He thrives in the split mind, the divided soul, the fragmented heart. But the moment you integrate what you've been taught to exile your desire, your shadow, your doubt, your wildness, his image begins to dissolve. Not because he's been defeated in battle, but because you no longer need him to explain your suffering. This is the power of unity consciousness. When you stop seeing yourself as a battleground between opposing forces, and start seeing yourself as a sacred convergence of all aspects, light, dark, known, unknown, you reclaim your wholeness. You realize that your soul was never in danger of being stolen, only forgotten. That your divinity was never lost, only buried beneath layers of belief. And once you uncover it, you stop needing saviors, scapegoats, or symbols of fear to guide your path. This shift doesn't happen all at once. The illusion is sticky. It clings to old habits, old fears, old identities. But with every breath of awareness, every act of discernment, every choice to love what was once rejected, you loosen its grip. You begin to see the world not as a battlefield of opposites, but as a mirror. Each person, each challenge, each moment, reflecting something within you. This is not passive spirituality. It's radical responsibility. It's the willingness to look at everything, especially the uncomfortable parts, and say, this too is me, and this too can be loved. In this space, the concept of evil shifts. No longer a cosmic villain plotting your downfall, it becomes ignorance, unconsciousness, the absence of remembrance. And the antidote is not violence, banishment, or fear, but light. Light meaning awareness, light meaning love, light meaning the unwavering choice to meet every illusion with truth, not to fight it, but to dissolve it. Because truth doesn't need to battle illusion, it simply reveals it for what it island. And when you stand in that truth, when you embody unity, the old narrative becomes laughable. The devil, once feared as the source of all darkness, is seen for what he always was, a character in a story written by those who needed you afraid. But you're not afraid anymore. You've stopped asking who's good and who's evil. You've started asking what's real, what's aligned, what's true. And truth, at its core, is simple. You are not separate, not from God, not from others, not from yourself. You are an expression of a single consciousness experiencing itself through form. When you live from this awareness, the need for punishment, judgment, or damnation disappears. Because there is no other to blame, no enemy to fight, only aspects of self to understand, forgive, and integrate. This is why unity consciousness dissolves the need for a devil, not because you've denied darkness, but because you've integrated it, not because you ignore suffering, but because you meet it with compassion. The illusion can only survive when you remain divided against others, against your past, against your own soul, but when you return to oneness, you reclaim the power that was yours all along. So the real battle was never between heaven and hell. It was between illusion and truth, between the story you inherited and the truth you're remembering, between the fear that says you must be saved and the knowing that says you already are. And every time you choose presence over programming, love over fear, wholeness over separation, you win, not against something, but for something, for your freedom, for your light, for your truth. You didn't come here to fight the devil. You came here to remember that you are God in form. You came here to wake up from the dream of division, to see through the stories, to step beyond the matrix, and in doing so, to light the way for others. Because when you remember who you are, you remind the world of what's possible. And that, more than anything, is what the illusion fears the most. What if I told you that you were never broken, that you were never cast out, never cursed, never in need of saving, that the deepest lie you've ever been told is that you were born in sin, when in truth, you were born in light? You've been carrying a story that doesn't belong to you. A story that told you to fear your own fire, that convinced you your power was dangerous, that taught you your divinity was conditional, and your worth could be revoked. But now, something inside you is stirring, something ancient, something fierce, something luminous, and it's time to remember, you are not the sinner, you are the flame. This world has worked tirelessly to convince you otherwise. It started when you were a child, when you were first told that some thoughts were wrong, that some desires were shameful, that curiosity was rebellion, and that you had to be saved from yourself. But the truth is, you were never meant to be tamed. You were meant to burn, not with destruction, but with illumination, not to be extinguished, but to rise, again and again, until you remembered what you truly are. The lie was always meant to disconnect you from that remembering. It had to, because a soul that remembers its own light cannot be controlled. It does not bow out of fear. It does not apologize for its power. It does not look to external authorities for permission to exist. The lie was never about keeping you humble. It was about keeping you small. Because once you know that the divine lives within you, not above you, not outside of you, but within, everything changes. The game ends. The chains fall. And you return to yourself. But to return to yourself, you must first reclaim what you've been taught to fear. The fire, that sacred inner fire that pulses in your belly, that truth that trembles in your chest, that wildness that can't be boxed in. You were told that fire was dangerous, that it would lead you astray, that it needed to be suppressed, punished, repented for. But that fire is your guide. It is the presence of your soul awakening. It is not here to destroy you. It's here to purify everything that is not truly you. You are not the fallen. You are the light bringer. The myth of the fall was never about punishment. It was about descent. Descent into density. Descent into experience. Descent into forgetting, so that you could choose to remember. So that you could choose to awaken not because you were told to, but because your soul reached a point where it couldn't sleep anymore. That is the true ascension, not floating away from the world, but fully embodying your divine fire within it, becoming a living flame that touches everything with love, with clarity, with presence. The idea that you are inherently sinful was a lie built to break you. It made you doubt your every instinct. It made you afraid of your own mind, your own body, your own intuition. It made you feel unworthy of joy, of abundance, of direct connection with Source. But you were never separate. You were never dirty. You were never less than. You were, and are, the embodiment of divine consciousness, in human form, flawed, yes, evolving, yes, but never unworthy, and certainly never in need of a savior to make you whole. When you embrace your inner fire, you don't become arrogant. You become free. You stop outsourcing your truth. You stop living in fear of making the wrong move. You begin to trust yourself, deeply, honestly, fiercely, and in that trust, you light up. You don't need to convince anyone else of your path, because your energy speaks for itself. You walk into rooms and shift the vibration, not by preaching, but by being. That's the power of someone who knows they are the flame, not because someone told them so, but because they remembered. And this remembering isn't just for you, it's for the world, because the world doesn't need more people afraid of their power. It needs people who are willing to stand in it. People who are willing to love without conditions, to speak truth without fear, to see the divine not just in the heavens, but in the mirror. The world needs you, not the masked you, not the conditioned you, but the you that burns with purpose, the you that knows freedom isn't rebellion, it's responsibility, the you that came here to ignite change, not wait for permission. So ask yourself now, what would it look like to stop apologizing for your fire? What would it feel like to live as if your very being was sacred? What would shift in your life if you stopped trying to be good and started being real? If you stopped trying to fit into old paradigms of righteousness and instead embodied truth, raw, unfiltered, alive? You were not sent here to be perfect. You were sent here to be whole. That means embracing your light and your shadow, your strength and your softness, your rage and your reverence. The devil was the name given to everything you were taught to suppress. But when you reclaim those parts, not to indulge them, but to understand and integrate them, you become unstoppable. Because wholeness is power, wholeness is holiness, wholeness is the flame. There will always be voices that try to pull you back into the old story, that tell you you're dangerous, misguided, sinful. Let them speak, and then let them fade. Because those voices are echoes from a world that is dying. You are here to birth a new one where truth is not feared, one where love is not transactional, one where fire is not punished, but celebrated as sacred. This is your invitation. To step out of the prison of shame, to walk boldly into the temple of your own being, to stop living like you're trying to earn your place here, and start living like you are the place, the sacred ground where divinity dances. You are not here to kneel before your fire, you are here to be it. To move through the world as light in motion, to transform the lie into liberation, not with words, but with embodiment. You are not the sinner. You never were. You are the spark, the light bearer, the one who came to remember and remind others. And no force, no doctrine, no story can take that from you. The flame may flicker, it may dim, but it will never go out, because it is who you are, not a part of you. You. So burn, beloved. Burn in truth. Burn in love. Burn in the knowing that you were never fallen. You were simply descending, preparing to rise even higher. You are not here to beg for light. You are the light. You are not here to fear the fire. You are the fire. You are not the outcast. You are the revelation. And the world is ready for your flame.